A small policy shift with massive consequences. It looked harmless on paper. A minor adjustment. A line added to a document few people ever read. No announcement. No debate. Just a small policy shift designed to streamline operations. And yet, that quiet change would ripple outward, reshaping behavior, incentives, and outcomes in ways no one anticipated. To understand why this moment still matters, we have to go back to a time when the company was trying to solve a very practical problem. Teams were moving slowly. Decisions took too long. Accountability felt blurred. Leadership wanted clarity, speed, simplicity. The solution they chose seemed logical. Introduce a new policy to standardize approvals and reduce ambiguity. At first glance, the policy appeared reasonable. It centralized decision-making authority for certain actions that had previously been distributed across teams. The goal was efficiency, fewer bottlenecks, clear ownership, faster execution. On the surface, it delivered exactly that. Approvals came quicker. Processes felt cleaner. Leadership praised the results. But policies don't just change rules. They change behavior. Our story begins a few weeks after the shift, when managers noticed something subtle but unusual. Teams stopped proposing experimental ideas. Discussions grew shorter. Alternatives disappeared from meetings. Decisions were being made faster, but with fewer options on the table. No one complained. In fact, everything looked smoother than before. An operations manager sensed something was off, not because performance dropped, it didn't, but because conversations changed. People spoke more carefully. They asked fewer what-if questions. Ease were framed to fit approval criteria rather than challenge assumptions. The policy had clarified authority, but it had also narrowed imagination. The manager began paying closer attention. Proposals that once sparked debate now arrived pre-aligned. Risks were quietly excluded. Edge cases went unmentioned. The organization was learning how to succeed under the new rule, and success meant not rocking the boat. At the time, it felt like maturity. No one realized yet that this small policy shift had started a chain reaction, one that would gradually alter how decisions were made, how information flowed, and how truth survived inside the company. And once those changes took hold, reversing them would be far more difficult than anyone expected. As weeks turned into months, the effects of the policy grew more pronounced. Teams adapted quickly, not by resisting the change, but by learning how to operate within it. Proposals became safer. Language softened. Risks were reframed as efficiencies. What couldn't be easily approved simply stopped being suggested. The system wasn't suppressing ideas. It was filtering them before they ever appeared. Middle managers felt the shift first. They became translators, reshaping ideas to survive the approval process. Instead of asking what was most needed, they asked what was most acceptable. Innovation didn't disappear. It narrowed. The range of thinking compressed into a band that fit neatly within the new policy's boundaries. Leadership interpreted this as progress. Fewer escalations, cleaner decisions, faster alignment. The organization appeared more disciplined, more predictable, more professional. Performance reviews rewarded those who navigated the system smoothly. Careers advanced for people who avoided friction. The policy quietly reshaped incentives, reinforcing behavior that prioritized approval over exploration. Meanwhile, signals from the market grew harder to process. Customer feedback that suggested deeper change didn't align with standardized pathways. Requests that required flexibility stalled. Edge cases multiplied at the margins, but rarely reached decision-makers. The company wasn't ignoring customers. It was responding within constraints that made meaningful adaptation increasingly difficult. An analyst noticed a pattern in post-implementation data. Projects approved under the new policy showed high completion rates, but declining impact. Initiatives were finishing on time, yet moving fewer needles. Effort was rising. Returns were flattening. The analyst flagged a concern, suggesting the policy might be optimizing for execution rather than effectiveness. The response was courteous but dismissive. The numbers still looked good. Efficiency metrics had improved. The policy was doing exactly what was designed to do. And in organizations driven by measurable outcomes, Questions that challenge the framework itself often struggle to gain traction. But beneath the surface, something fundamental was shifting. Teams were no longer solving problems. They were solving for approval. Over time, that distinction matters. Because when approval becomes the objective, reality becomes negotiable. Information is curated. Uncertainty is minimized. And complexity, where the most important truths often live, is quietly avoided. The policy hadn't failed. It had succeeded too well. And in doing so, it set the stage for consequences that would only become visible when the environment demanded flexibility the system could no longer provide. The consequences surfaced the moment the company faced a situation the policy had not been designed for. A sudden shift in customer behavior disrupted forecasts. Long-standing assumptions broke down. Teams needed to respond quickly, creatively, and with nuance. Instead, they reached for approval pathways that no longer match reality. Proposals stalled as they climbed the centralized ladder. Each revision made them safer and weaker. By the time ideas reached decision-makers, they had lost the edge required to address the problem. What remained were incremental adjustments applied to structural change. The organization moved, but in the wrong direction. Frontline teams felt the disconnect acutely. They saw the issue clearly. They knew what customers needed, but the solutions didn't fit the policy's criteria. Escalating felt pointless. Previous attempts had taught them that anything too novel would be delayed, diluted, or declined, so they adapted locally, creating unofficial workarounds to bridge the gap. These fixes kept things running, but they also hid the severity of the problem from leadership. Inside executive meetings, confidence persisted. Reports showed steady progress. Timelines were met. Decisions were documented cleanly. The policy had created the appearance of control at the exact moment control was slipping away. Leadership believed the company was responding effectively, unaware that the most critical information never reached the table. The analysts who had raised early concerns revisited the data with growing urgency. They noticed a widening gap between reported outcomes and real-world impact. Customers were satisfied on paper, but disengaged in practice. Teams were busy but misaligned. Effort increased while adaptability declined. The policy had optimized the system for a world that no longer existed. Then came the failure no one could explain. A major initiative, fully approved, perfectly executed, and delivered on time, fell flat in the market. Adoption lagged. Customers hesitated. Support requests spiked. Internally, confusion spread. The project had passed every checkpoint. It followed the policy exactly, and yet it failed to solve the problem it was meant to address. Post-mortems exposed an uncomfortable truth. The most important risks had been identified early, but filtered out before approval. The most relevant customer insights had been shared, but reframed into something less disruptive. The policy hadn't caused a failure directly. It had shaped the path that made failure inevitable. The conflict reached its peak when leadership finally asked the question they had avoided. How could something executed so well deliver so little value? The answer was simple and devastating. The system had stopped rewarding truth. It rewarded compliance. And once compliance became the goal, outcomes became secondary. The realization forced a reckoning. Leadership could no longer treat the failure as an execution problem. The policy that once promised clarity had quietly reshaped behavior in ways no metric had captured. The organization hadn't lost capability. It had lost candor. The climax came during a review where frontline teams were finally invited to speak without filters. They described how ideas were reshaped to survive approval, how risks were softened to avoid delays, how complexity was stripped away to fit standardized criteria. They didn't accuse the policy of malice. They described its logic and its consequences. Silence followed, not the comfortable kind that once signaled alignment, but the heavy kind that accompanies recognition. The resolution wasn't immediate. The policy wasn't simply reversed. Instead, leadership redefined its purpose. Approval pathways were loosened. Authority was redistributed. Experimental work was explicitly protected from standardization. Metrics shifted from completion to impact. Managers were trained to surface disagreement instead of smoothing it out. The change didn't restore trust overnight, but it reopened channels that had quietly closed. Ideas grew sharper. Risks surfaced earlier. Conversations regained texture. The organization relearned how to distinguish between efficiency and effectiveness. Looking back, the lesson became clear. Small policy shifts rarely announce their consequences. They reshape incentives invisibly, teaching people how to behave without ever instructing them directly. And once those behaviors become normal, outcomes follow, whether intended or not. The policy had delivered speed. What it hadn't delivered was truth. And without truth, even the most efficient system drifts. Sometimes the smallest shift in perspective becomes the beginning of a new future. A small